My name is Rex Schnelle. This is Sacred Space. We talk about all things in context of life and the gospel. And just so happens that my good friend, Scott Hawley, Professor Scott Hawley, who's professor of physics and all the interdisciplinary stuff at Belmont. He teaches audio engineering, machine learning, is an interest, numerical code or modeling, tech and society, science, religion, and I'll let him explain a little bit about where he is right now. He's actually he's in Belfast, Ireland right now, but he's going to be spending some time in England and Ireland and doing what he does, which is contextualizing science and the gospel. And he's also artificial intelligence expert, which is going to be an interesting conversation. So it is my joy once again to bring my friend Scott Hawley into our conversation. And Scott, tell us a little bit about this month or so that you're going to be spending traveling around London, Belfast, Edinburgh, Nottingham, Oxford. And this is trip number 3 in this context. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of so.
Yeah.
Well, I was on a grant program through Oxford a couple of years ago. That was kind of the occasion of our first talk together, Rex.
Right.
And so it's kind of fun that we're doing this again. Yeah. So COVID shut down, any travel plans for all of us. And I really wanted to be able to go back to the UK and connect with some people that either I had missed before or that wanted to see again. And in particular, I'm doing some technical work this summer, and it's in the area of machine learning and audio, and really London is a hotbed for that kind of thing. And so I was able to go to London, and my costs this summer are going to be covered by a new research consortium that's funding open source machine learning research, and in particular music related machine learning. The group is called Harmony. It's Harmony with an AI on the end. And
sweet.
They're trying to sort of democratize some deep learning, which has gotten kind of to the point where large models are only trainable for people who are, say, at Google or Facebook, or people who have major resources. And so this group is through various kinds of donations and philanthropies trying to make grants of computer availability, and in my case some travel funding for smaller collaborations of researchers to make some progress. And so that's been really fun. I have kind of a distributed research group this summer. And the reason I'm in Belfast is interesting. So I mentioned London. London's where I could really work. It turns out that Belmont University, where I teach, has a close relationship, or a growing relationship, with Queen's University in Belfast. And it just worked out for me to come over here and hang out for a couple weeks. And I'm going to be on a panel discussion on Wednesday about AI and society at the business school. And there are a lot of audio people here and a lot of people that do machine learning. So I'm looking forward to cross-pollination there. And then Edinburgh has a lot of people that I have been wanting to connect with, in addition to the people I did last time. And some of them, it turns out, I picked a key vacation week for a lot of people to be gone, but there's some other people around that should have a good time. And the rest of the trip is a little bit up in the air as far as who I'm going to get to see and hang out with. I now have an invitation to come to Cambridge, and I wasn't planning on going to Cambridge. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I'm not really sure. Yeah, if that's going to work out. But anyway.
Yeah. But to contextualize our conversation, Scott is a singer-songwriter. We both met that way. I am an engineer, so I do a lot of work. And so to contextualize a lot of the work that Scott has done in machine learning, artificial intelligence, we just had a recent conversation. I sent him an article on a particular software company that can listen to a stereo mix and using artificial intelligence can generate stems of instruments and stems of, how the math works. I don't know, but to be able to create stems without having to have the multi-track facility, that's just one of the contextual applications that we had talked about as well. And Scott has worked and actually created Signal Train, which is a algorithm that listens and machine learning process that can play a part and do some of this this isolation and learning. And so it's a real interesting. We even had a conversation about. I was doing some mastering, and there's some online mastering connections where you can sign up and you put in your data with a certain descriptor set, and it will master your song. And recently I did a remaster of a song that I used the original file as a model in the artificial intelligence machine, so it would listen to the original sonics of what happened. And I did a cover of that song, so it applied to that cover, and so it ended up sounding pretty close to the original master. And this is all through the wild west world of science and artificial intelligence, and that's just one application. So that's why Scott and I get a chance to talk and share and send links or whatever, but also in the context of science and religion, I guess would be the category that people would put on it. But Scott, as a believer and a teacher and a scientist, a Christian person who has a Christian worldview, I really enjoy how he deconstructs or parses and talks about just these particular issues in life. So have you seen any? You actually had mentioned to me, Scott, also the topic of living off shell with guiding constraints.
Yeah.
Is that launch it? I mean, just you have to go deep, but just let me know what you were thinking there.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of kind of overlap between some of my background in theoretical physics and some of the stuff that happens in machine learning and neural network modeling. And a lot of times there can be kind of a solution for something, which or a family of solutions of things, and we could sort of imagine that family of solutions as being like a surface, like maybe a two-dimensional surface. It might be curved in some way, and so normally you're on the surface, but then sometimes we consider, well, what happens if you go off the surface a little bit? What if you're not exactly solving things? And in particle physics, they refer to the surface, the solution, as the shell. And so you can talk about being on shell or off the shell.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
And it related in that, for a lot of my work previously in machine learning with audio, with Signal Train, for example, I spent so much time trying to get exact reproduction of the audio that I wanted. I spent a lot of time trying to get the noise levels down,
yes,
down and down and down, to try and really constrain things so that there was there's a proper way to do things, and this is it. And my affiliation with these folks from Harmony, a lot of them are electronic music folks, and they enjoy strange noises. They enjoy things that are, not audio fidelity, things that have distortion, things that have, they're kind of mixed up in time even. And so things that I might look at and say, oh, that's not a good sound. Some of the DJs will hear that and be like, oh, I can use that. And they'll go and they'll turn that into a song. And it's kind of, in a way, it's a little liberating in the sense of, especially as I spent essentially 3 years of my life trying to stay on this kind of solution surface or shell of audio fidelity, right? Which is really good. And then finding that sort of getting off of that, I'm not going to exactly use the word legalism, but that prescription can be life-giving. And yet it's not necessarily the case that we always want to be kind of off doing whatever we want to do. And so I know, for example, there's some things in life where life is messy A lot of times we there's a right way to do things, and there's a perfect way to be, and we're often somewhere off of that. We're not on there. And what happens with our physics models and machine learning models? A lot of times, what we do is, if we want to try to keep the our numerical solution or our simulation, if we want to try to keep it close to the true solution or on shell, then sometimes what we do is we'll put in essentially like a little bit of math that's like a rubber band that kind of pulls the solution where you are. It pulls it closer to the correct solution on over time. So you're not actually stipulating that it's always on the solution, but there's this attraction that will kind of help keep it on there. And it reminds me of so when I went to a church in London Sunday last week, St. Helens, and one of the things we were singing was "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing," right? And there's this line towards one of the later verses, "Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee."
To thee.
Yeah. And
there's that rubber band.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it makes me think of. It makes me think of, we have a tendency to deviate from the path. Jesus says that there's a narrow path. And I've noticed, like with a lot of the AI creativity tools, like some of you may have seen Mid-Journey or DALL-E or Imagen, where you can type some text and get an image. And I see so much. I've gotten tired, like on Instagram, I've gotten tired of seeing so many demon lords and skeletons and evil this and that. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a real creative professional, who has, deals with Hollywood and stuff, and who's a Christian. And I was asking him, why is it that there's so much like depictions of evil are out there in so many different ways, but there are so few depictions of good? And he said, well, there are lots of different ways to be evil. And it's a distortion of the good. So there's the good, and then there's a myriad of ways to be evil. So there's this huge variety. And so in that sense, I noticed that, we do want to try and stay somehow constrained to the path or the surface of living in the Spirit. And even though in life, because we're human, we're going to come off of it.
Right.
But we ask, Lord, can you give us, in terms of machine learning, it would be an extra term in the loss function. Right. And what that does over time is it tries to minimize the distance between where we want to be and where we are. And it doesn't actually force us on there, but it's this additional attractive thing. Right. And so I'm sort of praying, thank you for the freedom and the life-giving aspect of being able to be, there is a lot of life in variety. And we even notice that, for example, sometimes we have these expectations of the way things should be, and they're not God's expectations, right? Peter was surprised to find out that the Gentiles were, that he was going to be speaking to them. And so, let thy goodness like a fetter serve as an additional constraint or loss function in my evolution, Lord. That's what I would pray.
That's why I love talking to you, because you have a really interesting way of unpacking. But this kind of feeds into previous conversations we've had, because when you get off shell, you actually start to allow more creativity. For instance, like your friends who were looking for these sounds that weren't what you were after, and yet they could feed creativity, which, it can be static and dry, just to always have these constraints to get what you're expecting. But when you can get off shell and then be inspired by that creativity, that's an interesting part of creativity as well. And also I like in what you were talking about in spiritual terms is that, God's seal on us, like in that same verse, here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. There is this, and I wanted to use this phrase, trust the math sense, that it's going to be true. In other words, you can trust this and not so much worry about your spin-off, not worry about getting off the shell. And again, sure, you want your heart to be pulled back in. So you would pray that. Lord, let me pull back to you. However, in the process, we can trust his grip on us and not necessarily work so hard on our grip on him, even though that does give us joy and certain, but backing up about the creativity, it really intrigued me when we talked a little bit before about these sounds that you weren't necessarily after, but they could be very usable for somebody that's creative and uses these sounds. It would be interesting to see somebody who works so hard at trying to get the constraints to make it so accurate and get the noise down. And then the marketplace just kind of went the other direction. Like, no, we want things that are off the thing too. So
think about like distortion on guitars or on vocals. And it starts off in the 60s and the Beatles are cutting up their speaker cones and whatnot. And I'm sure the engineers are thought, no, you don't want to do that. Hey, that's going to make it sound bad. But there are all these kinds of artistic choices that end up sounding cool.
Right.
And I got to give a shout out. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the master engineer, when they overdrove the V72 preamp on the Beatles songs, there was this guy who built the V72 who knew that ultimately one day some engineer would go too far. So he put the transformer and he put a limiter so that it would never, ever go on the voltage. So that actually helped create the iconic distortion on Revolution. So that's like, to me, that's God's safety. It's like, I know you're going to go too far one day. So boom, here's a limiter. Anyway, but you really shout out to give.
So some of my collaborators, they're these guys called DataBots who they have a lot of let's just say non-Christian imagery. We don't have the same ideological perspective, but they do some really, really interesting compositions with neural networks. And for example, they have a song, and there's this AI song contest going on right now, and their song is called "Nuns in a Mosh Pit," and it is alternately glorious and horrific. And they synthesize all of these new sounds somehow, and it's really it really demonstrates what can be done with the medium. That's one thing that I find very fascinating is, so for a while with the neural networks, I was just trying to reproduce earlier effects. Like I was trying to have it learn an LA2A or learn this or that effect, but I kind of lost interest in that to some extent, because of course you can say, why redo what's already there? We don't need another compressor plugin, really. But does this technology, does it allow something totally new? Like the world before there were, I don't know, distressors, or there was a time before auto-tune, and there was I'm not saying we're in a better world now that there's auto-tune, but that was a new kind of effect, right? Sure. And so what is and the space of effects is infinite. Christian Steinmetz, a young man I really admire, another researcher, he had done a thing about random neural audio effects and just randomize the network, and you can get all kinds of different sounds, but they're not that business of like how to have it be new and yet cool. It's this classic music industry thing, right? We'll make it kind of different, but not too different.
Right. Yeah. But it also, interesting. You talk about the capabilities where we could go with it, because not only, audio is definitely our interest. So to me, somebody that says I can build an AI, filter or, analyzer that can reconstruct a particular type of, let's say, compressor, a dynamics processor. And the settings I can actually replicate for you to use on your own version of that particular thing, which definitely has value. Or let's just say an EQ processor, and fast Fourier form, or there's always the problem with how they design some of these EQs, that as you would increase the amplitude, the Q width would go down, and they would sound a particular way because of that. What comes to mind is like the world famous EQs that were mid-band EQs, and that's what they would do, is they had a boost and a cut feature, and as you would boost, the Q would get pointier so that it wouldn't boost the whole high end, just a particular frequency.
Yeah.
And then the same way with the bass, as the bass went down, it would actually do a notch rather than just roll the whole bass. So it created kind of like how we began to get these big sounding mixes with very focused and tailored high end and low end. And they sounded sweet because of the way they did it. Well, you can, with artificial intelligence, you can actually design from that. You can actually build in features, keep out some other features, and you can pick and choose. Just like when you do, you know, like you said, we don't need another plugin. Well, the reason is because they've done such a good job of creating or recreating some of that from the artificial. Now, let's jump to another one. Like we were talking about album covers and artwork. And and also, so the parameters, like, so you have data sets. What is beautiful? You know, what era of art are you going to talk about? What style of art? You know, what color texture? Is it going to be surrealistic? And you shared some pictures of several of these things, and I don't even know how you did that, but maybe you put some key search words or something, and then the AI engine generated these things, you know, that are pretty remarkable. It had some very nice textures of classic art, and yet they were, you know, nonsensical in some other senses.
And so we're looking at doing some of that with audio and music, and be able to kind of describe the sound that you want, or describe the effects, some kind of natural language generative approach that hopefully would still sound good and not complete nonsense.
Sure. Well,
I can do complete nonsense.
Yeah, and that actually is a good trait, because that actually keeps creativity fresh. I know I'll reach for sounds and try to create something just that, you know, is obscure or whatever. And when I can let my brain break the rules, like if I get off shell, I can, you know, be less constrained without having to go, no, it's got to be sonically pristine and to do this thing too. And imagine God and everything that he's gifted science, everything he's gifted art. I can't imagine encountering the mind of God in science, in creativity, in art, the one who originally conceptualized and then gave us this incredible gift. And then, so the expression of every individual to be able to interpret that. Part of me is grateful, because the people that I meet, like you and friends that, you know, we actually get a chance to chase rabbits with technology or even theology. We get to talk about these things. But the fact that we each color in a very unique way that doesn't diminish from the truth, or it doesn't diminish from a very specific, let's call it a data set of God's revealed, you know, he's dictated, he's spoken this. And yet it's like a diamond with many facets, you know, and that's why scientists, and especially scientists that have a Christian worldview, I could drink coffee and talk all day long, just because it's talking about describing this beauty.
That fits in with my work really well, right? Because with a lot of machine learning models, we're always dealing with really large combinations of numbers that we tend to regard as multi-dimensional spaces. Like the current audio model I'm working in, we use 32 dimensions, right? And so we have a bunch of points in a 32 dimensional space, which you can't visualize, but so what I do is I project that down to a 3-dimensional point cloud, and then I can like spin it around and look at the shapes and things, and you can kind of see like the drums are over here and the keyboards are over here and stuff. But realizing that even that, it's just what my mind is able to comprehend of this much larger and richer reality. And sometimes when you project things down, things seem like they're occupying the same space, like it's a contradiction, like this is, something is this and that together. But really that's just because you're projecting from a larger dimensionality where things really are separate. And I don't know if that's necessarily a one-to-one kind of thing with like paradoxes and things that we wonder about theologically. But it is the case that there can be some things that, given our perspective, we can only see certain aspects of it. Right. And sometimes those aspects seem problematic But if we realize if it's possible to have a perspective, a larger or a wider perspective, then sometimes things get clearer, which is why I project to 3D, so I can at least spin things around, because usually people project down to 2D, and then you're really like stuff ends up being like on top of each other, and it's hard to see what's going on. So
yeah. And as a teacher, your drive is to actually teach and get somebody to understand. So the better you can understand and then present what you see, maybe somebody else will understand that too. And to me, it's almost like, obviously, the complexity that God has created. Sanctification is this process by which we learn, we discover these things start to, I can imagine Newton writing, law of gravity, and then, these different understanding, and all of a sudden, like you said, that 2D model becomes 3D, and then you can actually reveal this beauty that happens, this maybe even a conundrum or whatever. Light, for instance, it has weight and its energy, and it just, it kind of confuses states. However, we see in Scripture, we see that God is light too. And it just seems to me that science is bearing truth to the idea of these dimensions that ultimately I think we will maybe grasp or understand, but it'll be an enjoyment. That's the part that I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose the wonder. I don't want to lose the enjoyment. And that's why, I think that's why I'm a musician. So.
Yeah, that also relates to another sort of, and I don't want us to get too far afield. I know we don't want to make this too long, but I have an interest in categories and classification, and that came out of my earlier work in Oxford. And sometimes we have these categories for things because of the limits that we're used to experiencing them. For example, with light, right? People had this category of light being a particle or light being a wave, and it has to be one or the other, right? And it turns out no, light is it's sort of a compact wave shape, and it sort of depends on the experiment you're doing whether it's going to behave more particle-like or wave-like, but there's no real contradiction there. It's just these categories were developed through ordinary human experience. And as you know, even theologically, when we base our ideas on truth completely on just our own limited human experience, it can be challenging. It's not recommended.
Recently, you kind of shared a little bit how worship sneaks into that. And how it kind of keeps you true. And it's interesting, even you talked about the constraints, free of constraints. Is there like a personal experience that kind of proved itself even in that, giving that descriptor, what you just told me about living off shell, I mean, that's interesting that you thought about that.
In art, and it happens in spiritual life, and it happens in science as well, where you've been operating on a sort of a set of assumptions, and then relaxing some of those assumptions. So if we relax the assumption of audio fidelity, what do we get? Or in art, if we relax the assumption of painting a realistic depiction of what we see and adding some impressionism to it, what do we get? Or in mathematics, if we relax the assumption of flat Euclidean geometry, then what do we get out of that? And often there's a richer sort of kind of thing going on, but we don't want to completely unhinge what we have, or else things become meaningless. Was it Nietzsche that talked about the earth is not the earth now unchained from the sun? Are we not forever falling? Now that we come to this belief that God is dead and that we've killed him. And I don't think it's not necessarily the fact that we sever a connection with what we had sort of had been driving along in a certain direction, but the opportunity to explore around that true solution can be helpful. And I think God gives us that opportunity as well. And there are a lot of things that as that rubber band is sort of pulling, they may not be true for us in the moment at any given time or at any given iteration of the simulation, but there are things that are asymptotically true, things that given enough time and given this process will become true to the point where you can talk about them as if they are certainties. And I think there's a lot of carryover in terms of the Christian perspective as well, that there are things that are true in the sense that they are metaphysically guaranteed in our future, and yet as of now, we do not see all things under his dominion. So
that's and with that, the already and the not yet, the truth that we don't necessarily want to become completely unhinged, but we can trust the creator of the hinge. We can trust the fact that there is, that connection, and that the beauty of what God allows us to grow into sanctification, to understand that we can come off the shell a little bit and trust the fact that he won't ever let us out of his hand.
Yeah.
So thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. We'll check in again and find out, if there's something exciting that you encounter. We'll talk and we'll text and we'll do another one of these. So
I do want to share one little exciting thing.
Okay.
I did get to have lunch in London at Google with a DeepMind researcher that I've admired his work for a while, and that was really that was exciting.
Was that a good? Yeah, you had talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, and I don't want to name the guy particularly, but we talked the whole time. We talked about a particular kind of deep learning model that's kind of all the rage right now, that's driving a lot of these generative models called diffusion models, and they're based on some things from physics, which you would think would give me a leg up on understanding this stuff, but it's actually not within my expertise. So I'm really having to spend a lot of time trying to learn this stuff, but it's good stuff.
Wow, that's great. Well, thanks, brother. Appreciate it, and we'll look forward to next time.
All right,
next time on Sacred Space.